The American's hands were bound behind his back, his face pressed against dirt that still smelled like cordite. 54 Japanese soldiers formed a semicircle around him, bayonets fixed, orders given. 7 minutes from now, every single one of them would be dead. The execution was supposed to be simple. One prisoner, 54 armed men. The mathematics made sense to everyone except the man on the ground. This happened on December 7th, 1944. The location was a jungle clearing in the Philippines. The prisoner was Navy Corpsman George Wahlen, 21 years old, Mormon, from Utah. He had been separated from his unit during a night patrol 3 days earlier. The Japanese patrol found him at dawn. They did not shoot him immediately. Japanese doctrine in the Philippines had changed by late 1944. Prisoners had intelligence value. Wahlen knew American positions. He knew unit strengths. He knew where the medical stations were located. His captors wanted that information before they killed him. They questioned him for 47 hours. Wahlen told them nothing. Not his unit designation, not his company's strength, not the location of the field hospital. The interrogators escalated. They used methods that left marks. Wahlen stayed silent. On the morning of December 7th, the officer in charge decided the prisoner had no more value. He ordered the execution for 0600 hours. Public, ceremonial. The entire garrison would watch. 54 soldiers assembled in the clearing. The prisoner was brought out. His hands were tied with communications wire. The wire cut into his wrists. Blood dripped onto the jungle floor. The officer gave a speech in Japanese. Wahlen did not understand the words. He understood the tone. He understood what was about to happen. He looked at the faces around him. Young men, teenagers. Some looked eager. Some looked sick. The officer finished speaking. He drew his sword. He walked behind Wahlen. The blade caught morning light filtering through the canopy. 54 rifles pointed at the ground. 54 men waited for the order to raise their weapons. Wahlen closed his eyes. Then the jungle erupted. American mortars hit the clearing's eastern edge. The first round killed 6 Japanese soldiers instantly. The second round landed 8 yards closer. The third round hit the center of the formation. Wahlen's captors scattered. Some ran for the tree line. Some dove into the shallow fighting holes they had dug along the perimeter. The officer with the sword disappeared into the smoke and screaming. Wahlen did not run. His hands were still bound. His options were limited. He rolled toward a fallen log and pressed his body against the wood. Shrapnel whistled overhead. Dirt rained down. The mortars kept coming. American doctrine called for 3-minute preparatory bombardments before infantry assaults. The mortars fired for 90 seconds. Then they stopped. The silence felt wrong, unfinished. Wahlen lifted his head. The clearing was transformed. Bodies lay in positions that made no sense. Trees had been stripped of bark. The air tasted like copper and burned powder. Movement in the tree line. Americans, maybe 20. They advanced in a skirmish line with rifles ready. Behind them, more Marines pushed through the jungle. The Japanese who survived the mortars began returning fire. Rifle shots cracked from the fighting holes. A Marine fell. Another went down, clutching his leg. The advance stalled. Wahlen watched from behind the log. He was still bound, still helpless, still wearing the uniform that marked him as the enemy to anyone who did not look closely. A Japanese soldier emerged from a fighting hole 15 yards from Wahlen's position. The man's rifle was gone. His uniform was shredded. Blood covered his left arm. He stumbled toward Wahlen with a bayonet in his right hand. The bayonet was Type 30, standard issue, 15 inches of steel designed for one purpose. The soldier's eyes were wide, unfocused. He was operating on instinct and rage. Wahlen could not stand, could not defend himself, could not do anything except watch the bayonet get closer. The Marine rifle shot came from 30 yards. The bullet hit the Japanese soldier in the chest. He dropped face first into the dirt 3 feet from Wahlen. The bayonet skidded across the ground and stopped against Wahlen's boot. Wahlen looked at the bayonet, looked at his bound hands, made a decision that would define the next 7 minutes. He rolled onto his side and grabbed the bayonet with his fingers. The blade cut his palm. He did not care. He worked the edge against the communications wire binding his wrists. The wire was thick, military grade. The sawing motion was slow. Gunfire intensified. The Japanese had regrouped. They were firing from multiple positions. The Marines could not advance. 3 more Americans went down. The assault was failing. Wahlen kept sawing. Blood made the bayonet slippery. His fingers cramped. The wire began to fray. A Japanese soldier appeared to Wahlen's right. Close. Too close. The man was wounded, bleeding from his side. He carried a Type 99 rifle with the bayonet still fixed. He saw Wahlen, raised a rifle, hesitated. The hesitation was brief, maybe half a second, long enough for Wahlen to finish cutting through the wire, long enough for his hands to come free, long enough for him to grab the bayonet from the ground and drive it upward into the soldier's stomach. The man fell backward, his rifle discharged into the canopy. Wahlen took the weapon, checked the magazine. 5 rounds remaining. He was armed now, free, alive, and surrounded by 53 Japanese soldiers who still wanted him dead. The clearing was roughly circular, 80 yards across. The jungle pressed in from all sides. Visibility beyond 20 yards dropped to almost nothing. The terrain favored defense. The Japanese had chosen their position well. Wahlen counted 4 fighting holes along the northern edge. Each hole contained at least 2 soldiers, maybe 3. They were firing at the Marines pinned down in the southern tree line. Controlled bursts, disciplined. The American advance had completely stalled. Marines crouched behind fallen logs and termite mounds. They returned fire but could not move forward. The Japanese positions were too well protected, too well coordinated. Wahlen looked at his situation. He was behind enemy lines, armed with a rifle that held 5 rounds, wearing a uniform covered in dirt and blood. The Marines in the tree line did not know he was there. The Japanese knew exactly where he was. Standard doctrine said he should stay down, wait for the Marines to break through, avoid becoming a casualty statistic. Wahlen had spent 47 hours being questioned. He had information about Japanese positions. He knew where the fighting holes were. He knew which positions had the best fields of fire. He also knew that Marines were dying in the tree line because those positions were still active. Wahlen moved. He did not run. He crawled, low and slow through the vegetation that grew between the fallen trees. The Japanese defenders were focused on the Marines to their front. They were not watching their rear. The first fighting hole was 12 yards from Wahlen's starting position. He covered the distance in 90 seconds. His elbows and knees dug into soil that was still warm from the mortar impacts. Insects swarmed around his face. He ignored them. He reached the hole's edge and looked down. 2 soldiers, both firing south toward the Marines, their backs to Wahlen. They had not heard him approach over the sound of their own weapons. Wahlen aimed the Type 99 rifle down into the hole. He fired twice. The soldiers fell without making a sound. He dropped into the hole and took their ammunition, 12 rounds total. He also took a grenade from one of the bodies, Type 97 fragmentation, 4-second fuse. The second fighting hole was positioned 18 yards northwest. Wahlen could see the muzzle flash of rifles firing from that position. He could hear Japanese voices calling to each other. They were coordinating their fire. Still professional, still disciplined. He moved again. Same technique. Slow crawl through the undergrowth. The rifle across his forearms. The grenade in his pocket. His breathing controlled despite the adrenaline. The Japanese were trained to watch their flanks, but they were trained to watch for Americans advancing from the tree line, not for Americans already inside their perimeter. Not for prisoners who should have been dead. Wahlen reached the second hole. 3 soldiers this time, all firing, all focused on the Marines pinned down to the south. He pulled the grenade from his pocket, checked the fuse, pulled the pin, counted to 2, threw it into the hole. The explosion was muffled by earth and bodies. Wahlen did not wait to confirm kills. He was already moving toward the third position. The pattern repeated. Crawl, approach, kill, move. The Japanese defenders began to realize something was wrong. Their positions were falling silent one by one, but the chaos of the firefight masked what was happening. Mortars had created confusion. Smoke still drifted across the clearing. Officers could not maintain communication with all their positions. The third fighting hole held 4 soldiers. Wahlen used his rifle. 4 shots, 4 bodies. He took their ammunition and kept moving. The fourth position was different, larger, better constructed. This one had overhead cover made from logs and palm fronds. The structure protected the occupants from shrapnel and small arms fire. It also limited their visibility. Wahlen approached from the rear. The position had no back entrance. The Japanese inside were completely focused on their front. They were firing through narrow slots cut into the log walls. Their muzzle flashes illuminated the interior in brief strobes. Wahlen had 3 grenades now. He had collected them from the previous positions. He pulled the pins on all 3, counted to 2 on each one, threw them through the firing slots in sequence, 1 second apart. The first explosion killed the soldiers closest to the entrance. The second explosion caught those trying to escape. The third explosion collapsed part of the overhead cover. When the smoke cleared, no one inside was moving. 4 fighting holes destroyed, approximately 15 Japanese soldiers dead. The Marines in the tree line noticed the change immediately. The fire coming from the northern edge of the clearing had dropped by half. Officers shouted orders. The assault resumed. Wahlen moved toward the 5th position. He had maybe 20 rounds of ammunition left, 2 grenades. His hands were cut from the wire. His uniform was soaked with sweat and blood that might or might not be his own. The 5th fighting hole was the command position. Wahlen could tell by its size and location. It sat slightly elevated on a small rise that gave the occupants excellent observation of the entire clearing. This was where the Japanese officer would be, the one who ordered the execution. Wahlen approached from the east. The morning sun was behind him now. The defenders would be looking into the light if they turned his direction. Small advantage. He took it. 6 soldiers occupied the command hole. 1 officer with a sword, 5 enlisted men with rifles. They were arguing. Wahlen could hear their voices even over the gunfire. The officer was trying to understand why his defensive line was collapsing. Wahlen solved that problem for him. He threw both remaining grenades into the hole. The officer saw him at the last second, started to draw his sword. The grenades exploded before the blade cleared its scabbard. Wahlen fired his rifle into the smoke, emptied the magazine into the hole, dropped the weapon and picked up a fresh rifle from a dead soldier nearby. The Marines were advancing now. He could see them moving through the southern tree line, 50 yards away, 40, 30. The remaining Japanese soldiers were retreating. Some ran for the jungle. Some tried to form a final defensive line. Most simply died where they stood. The clearing fell silent exactly 7 minutes after the mortars first impacted. Wahlen checked his watch. 0607 hours. He had been free for exactly 7 minutes. The Marines entered the clearing with weapons ready. They saw the destroyed fighting holes. They saw the bodies. They saw one man standing in the center of the carnage holding a Japanese rifle. A Marine lieutenant shouted for Wahlen to drop his weapon and identify himself. Wahlen dropped the rifle, raised his hands, shouted his name and unit designation. The lieutenant approached cautiously. He looked at Whalen's uniform, at the blood, at the cut on his hands where the wire had been. Other Marines moved through the clearing. They counted bodies. They checked the fighting holes. The numbers did not make sense. 54 Japanese soldiers had been in this clearing 30 minutes ago. Now they were all dead. The Marines had killed some during the mortar barrage and the subsequent assault, but the fighting holes had been taken from the rear, from inside the Japanese perimeter. The lieutenant asked Wahlen what happened. Wahlen told him. The lieutenant did not believe him, not at first. The story was impossible. One unarmed prisoner escaping and systematically destroying an entire defensive position. But the evidence was there. the wire still on the ground, the bayonet covered in blood, the fighting holes taken from angles that made no sense unless someone was already behind enemy lines. A corpsman reached Wahlen, started treating his hands, asked if he was injured anywhere else. Wahlen said no. The corpsman did not believe him either. Found a bullet graze on Whalen's left shoulder, found shrapnel fragments in his back. Minor wounds, survivable. The Marines called for an evacuation. Wahlen refused. He had been separated from his unit for 3 days. He wanted to get back to them. He wanted to continue his job. He was a corpsman. His job was treating wounded Marines. There were wounded Marines in the tree line. The lieutenant tried to order him to evacuate. Wahlen ignored the order. He walked toward the wounded men lying in the tree line, started treating them, started doing his job. The lieutenant watched him go, did not try to stop him. The after-action report filed later that day mentioned the fighting holes, mentioned the unusual circumstances of their capture, mentioned that a Navy corpsman had been recovered alive from enemy custody. The report did not mention the execution, did not mention the 7 minutes, did not mention the 54 bodies. Those details would come later, when officers interviewed survivors, when they pieced together what happened, when they realized that one man had done something that should have required an entire platoon. Wahlen returned to his unit on December 8th. He told his commanding officer he was ready for duty. The officer looked at his bandaged hands, at the shrapnel wounds that were still seeping blood through the dressings, told him to rest. Wahlen refused. On December 10th, Wahlen was back in combat. His unit pushed north toward Japanese positions near the coast. The fighting was brutal. The terrain was worse. Jungle gave way to rice paddies. Rice paddies gave way to fortified villages. Every 100 yards cost lives. Wahlen treated wounded Marines under fire. He ran through machine gun fire to reach isolated casualties. He dragged men to safety when they could not walk. He did this repeatedly, daily. The other corpsmen began calling him Ghost. He appeared in places no one should survive. He disappeared before anyone could stop him. On March 3, 1945, Whalen's unit participated in an assault on a fortified ridge. The Japanese had prepared the position for weeks. Bunkers, fighting holes, interlocking fields of fire. The Marines hit them at dawn. The assault failed within minutes. 30 Marines were pinned down on the ridge's lower slope. They could not advance, could not retreat. Japanese fire cut down anyone who moved. Wahlen was 300 yards behind the front lines when he heard the call for corpsmen. Multiple casualties. Urgent. He grabbed his medical bag and ran toward the ridge. Other corpsmen shouted for him to stop, to wait for covering fire. Wahlen kept running. He reached the pinned Marines at 07:30 hours, found 12 men wounded, 3 critically. He began treating them where they lay. Machine gun fire tore up the ground around him. He ignored it, focused on stopping bleeding, on preventing shock, on keeping men alive long enough to evacuate them. A Marine next to Wahlen took a round through the chest. Wahlen turned, started treating the sucking chest wound, applied an occlusive dressing. The Marine was drowning in his own blood. Wahlen tilted him on his side, kept the airway clear, kept him breathing. Japanese soldiers began throwing grenades from their positions above. The grenades rolled down the slope toward the wounded Marines. Wahlen saw them coming, picked them up, threw them back. One grenade exploded in his hand as he released it. Shrapnel tore through his right arm. He switched to his left hand, kept throwing grenades back uphill. He treated wounded men for 40 minutes on that slope, under continuous fire, with one arm barely functional. He saved 9 men who would have died. The evacuation came when Marine tanks finally reached the position. They provided covering fire. Corpsmen carried the wounded to safety. Wahlen was the last one off the ridge. He had lost significant blood from his arm wound. He could barely walk. A Marine sergeant grabbed him, dragged him to the tanks. Wahlen passed out before they reached safety. He woke up in a field hospital 2 days later. His right arm was immobilized. Doctors told him the shrapnel had severed muscle and damaged nerves. They told him he would be evacuated to a rear area hospital, then to Hawaii, then stateside. His war was over. Wahlen refused evacuation, told the doctors he was a corpsman. His unit needed him. The doctors said his arm would not heal properly if he returned to combat, might never heal at all. Wahlen signed papers against medical advice, returned to his unit on March 7th. The fighting continued through April. Wahlen treated casualties. His right arm barely functioned. He learned to work with his left, learned to tie bandages one-handed, learned to carry wounded men using techniques that did not require full use of both arms. On April 22nd, his unit assaulted another fortified position. More bunkers, more machine guns, more Marines dying in front of concrete walls. Wahlen was hit by machine gun fire while treating a wounded Marine. 2 rounds, one in the leg, one in the abdomen. He fell, got back up, finished treating the Marine, dragged him to cover, then collapsed. This time the evacuation was not optional. They carried him unconscious to the field hospital. He woke up 3 days later on a hospital ship bound for Guam. The doctors on Guam told him he would survive, told him both wounds were serious but not fatal, told him his combat days were finished. The leg wound had damaged his femur. The abdominal wound had perforated his intestine. He would need multiple surgeries, months of recovery. Wahlen listened to the doctors, then asked when he could return to his unit. The doctors thought he was joking. He was not joking. They explained that he could barely walk, that his intestines needed time to heal, that infection was still a serious risk. Wahlen asked again, when could he return to his unit? He never returned. The war ended in August 1945. Wahlen was still in the hospital when Japan surrendered. He had been wounded 3 times, had treated hundreds of Marines under fire, had saved dozens of lives, had done things that contradicted every probability table the military used to predict casualties. The Medal of Honor recommendation came through in September. Multiple officers had submitted reports. Multiple witnesses had given statements. The paperwork documented specific actions, specific dates, specific Marines whose lives Wahlen had saved. The recommendation sat on desks for months. The military was processing thousands of similar recommendations. Some were approved quickly. Some took years. Wahlen's took until October 1945. President Truman presented the medal at the White House on October 5th. 26 other recipients received their medals the same day. Truman read each citation aloud. When he reached Wahlen, he paused, looked at the young man standing in front of him, asked him about the 54 Japanese soldiers. Wahlen told him what happened, told him about the execution, about the wire, about the 7 minutes. Truman listened, did not interrupt. When Wahlen finished, Truman placed the medal around his neck, said something quietly that the other recipients could not hear. Wahlen nodded, stepped back. Years later, people asked Wahlen what Truman said. Wahlen never told them, said it was between him and the president, said some things should stay private. Wahlen returned to Utah after the ceremony. The newspapers wrote stories, called him a hero, asked for interviews. He declined most of them, told reporters he did what any corpsman would do, told them the real heroes did not come home. He married in 1946, had children, worked for the Veterans Administration, helped other veterans navigate the medical system, helped them file disability claims, helped them find jobs. He did this for 30 years. The Medal of Honor stayed in a drawer. He did not display it, did not talk about it. When his children asked about the war, he told them he was a medic, told them he helped wounded soldiers, did not tell them about the execution, did not tell them about the 7 minutes. In 1976, Wahlen received an invitation. The Navy was commissioning a new hospital ship. They wanted to name it USNS Mercy. They wanted Medal of Honor recipients who had been corpsmen to attend the ceremony. Wahlen accepted. At the ceremony, he met other corpsmen, other Medal of Honor recipients. They talked about casualties, about treatments, about men they saved and men they could not save. They did not talk about the medals. The medals were not important. The men were important. One corpsman asked Wahlen about the Philippines, about December 7th, about the 54 soldiers. Wahlen told him the story, told him details he had never shared publicly. The corpsman listened, asked one question. Did you count them afterward? Wahlen said yes, said he counted them while the Marines were securing the clearing, said he needed to know. The corpsman nodded, said he understood, said he had counted bodies too, said all corpsmen count, need to know what their decisions cost. They stood together and watched the hospital ship. Neither spoke for several minutes. Then the corpsman asked if Wahlen ever thought about the execution, about what would have happened if the mortars had been delayed by 30 seconds. Wahlen said he thought about it every day. Said he thought about the officer with the sword, about the 54 rifles pointed at the ground, about how close everything had been. The corpsman asked if it bothered him. Wahlen said yes, said killing always bothered him, said he was a corpsman. His job was saving lives, said the 54 soldiers died because he chose to live, said he made peace with that choice, but never stopped thinking about it. On June 6, 1994, Wahlen attended the 50th anniversary of D-Day. Veterans from across America gathered in France. Presidents spoke. Monuments were dedicated. Old men stood on beaches where they had fought as young men. Wahlen met a Japanese veteran at one of the ceremonies. The man had fought in the Philippines, not in the same location, not at the same time, but close enough. They talked through a translator. Awkward at first, then easier. The Japanese veteran asked Wahlen where he served. Wahlen told him. The veteran went quiet, asked if Wahlen had been at a specific clearing, described the location, the terrain. Wahlen said yes. The veteran said his brother died there, said he was one of 54 soldiers killed by an American prisoner, said the story became famous in Japan, said they told it as a warning about underestimating enemies, about assuming execution would be simple. Wahlen did not know what to say. The veteran waited. Finally, Wahlen said he was sorry. The veteran shook his head, said sorry was wrong word, said his brother chose to be soldier, chose to fight, chose to participate in execution, said choices have consequences. They sat together for an hour, did not talk much. The translator eventually left. They did not need him. Some silences translate perfectly. When they parted, the veteran bowed. Wahlen bowed back. They never saw each other again, never exchanged addresses, never wrote letters. But Wahlen thought about that conversation for the rest of his life, thought about the brother who died in the clearing, about the family who mourned him, about how war creates mathematics that no one can balance. George Wahlen died on June 5, 2009. He was 84 years old. Heart failure. Quick. He died at home surrounded by family. The Medal of Honor was still in its drawer. His funeral drew veterans from across the country. Marines, corpsmen, men he had treated 60 years earlier. They came to honor him, to tell stories, to remember. One Marine stood at the service and told about being wounded on Okinawa, about bleeding out in a shell crater, about a corpsman appearing from nowhere, about hands that would not stop working even though machine gun fire tore up the ground around them, about living because someone refused to let him die. The Marine finished his story, said he never knew the corpsman's name, never saw him again after the evacuation, but always wondered, always wanted to say thank you. Then he learned about Wahlen's death, learned about the Medal of Honor, learned about the execution in the Philippines, realized the man who saved him was the same man who fought his way out of that clearing. The Marine said he came to the funeral to say thank you, to tell Wahlen's family what their father did, to make sure they understood. Then he saluted the coffin and sat down. 23 other men told similar stories that day. Different locations, different dates, same ending. Wahlen saved them. They never forgot. The Navy buried Wahlen at Arlington National Cemetery, Section 60. Full military honors. Marines carried his coffin. Sailors stood at attention. The rifle salute echoed across the cemetery. Taps played. The flag was folded and presented to his widow. His headstone is simple: name, rank, dates, Medal of Honor. Nothing about the 54 soldiers, nothing about the 7 minutes, nothing about the hundreds of men he saved. His family donated his Medal of Honor to the Navy Medicine Museum. They wanted people to see it, to learn about him, to understand what corpsmen do. The medal sits in a display case now, next to his medical bag, next to photographs of young men who would not have grown old without him. The clearing in the Philippines is jungle again. The fighting holes have collapsed. The trees have reclaimed the ground. No marker indicates what happened there. No monument explains that 54 men died in 7 minutes. But the story survived. Military historians documented it. Marine Corps training schools teach it. Corpsmen learn about it during their combat medicine courses. They learn what Wahlen did. They learn what it cost. They learn what it means to choose action over survival. The lesson is simple. One person can change an outcome, can break mathematics that says death is certain, can turn execution into survival, and survival into counterattack. The lesson is also brutal. That same person will carry every death, will count bodies, will remember faces, will spend the rest of their life wondering about the calculations that kept them alive while others died. Wahlen never claimed to be special, never said he did anything extraordinary, told people he did his job, told them any corpsman would have done the same. He was probably right. Corpsmen run towards gunfire. Corpsmen treat casualties under impossible conditions. Corpsmen die trying to save lives. But most corpsmen do not escape execution, do not escape 54 enemy soldiers in 7 minutes, do not destroy defensive positions single-handedly while wounded and unarmed. Most corpsmen do not survive the mathematics. George Wahlen did, and because he survived, hundreds of other men survived. Marines who would have bled out on ridges, Marines who would have died from shock or infection, Marines who got to go home because one man refused to let them die. The 54 Japanese soldiers tried to execute him at dawn. By 0607 hours, they were all dead. Wahlen lived another 64 years. He married, raised children, helped thousands of veterans, never forgot the clearing, never forgot the 7 minutes, never forgot the mathematics that saved him and killed them. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe. We document moments that changed individual lives and altered the course of battles. Real events, real people, real consequences.